I was working the night shift at an abandoned factory in Detroit. The place was huge, filled with rusted machinery and broken windows. My job was to keep an eye on the place, make sure no one was breaking in or causing trouble. It was boring and lonely, but it paid the bills. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard noises coming from one of the back rooms. It wasn't unusual to hear the building creak and groan, but this sounded different. Like footsteps. I grabbed my flashlight and headed towards the noise. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was probably just a stray animal. As I got closer, I could hear voices. Low, murmuring voices. I rounded a corner and saw a group of people huddled together. They looked rough, dirty clothes and unkempt hair. They were squatters. I'd seen them around the city before, but never inside the factory. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound confident. "You're not supposed to be here." They turned to look at me, their faces shadowed in the dim light. One of them, a tall guy with a beard, stepped forward. "We ain't hurting nobody," he said. "Just looking for a place to stay." "This place isn't safe," I said, my voice shaking a bit. "You need to leave." The guy with the beard laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the empty space. "You think you can make us?" he asked, taking a step closer. The others behind him were watching, their expressions hard. I backed up a step, feeling a surge of fear. "I'll call the police," I threatened, pulling out my phone. As soon as I did, one of the squatters, a woman with wild eyes, lunged at me. She grabbed my wrist and twisted it, making me drop the phone. It clattered to the ground, the screen shattering. Before I could react, the tall guy grabbed me and shoved me against the wall. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his face inches from mine. I could smell his breath, rancid and sour. The others were closing in, surrounding me. I struggled, but he was strong. "Let me go!" I shouted, but no one came to help. It was just me and them, alone in the dark. The woman picked up my phone and smashed it against the floor, making sure it was completely destroyed. "No cops," she hissed, her eyes wild. "We can't have no cops here." They dragged me deeper into the factory, away from the exits. My heart was racing, and I was starting to panic. They threw me into a small room and slammed the door shut, locking it from the outside. I was trapped. I banged on the door, shouting for help, but there was no one around to hear me. I could hear them talking outside, their voices muffled. They were planning something, but I couldn't make out what. I sat down on the cold, concrete floor, trying to figure out what to do. Hours passed. I could hear them moving around, but they never came back to the room. I was exhausted, but too scared to sleep. Every noise made me jump, expecting them to burst in at any moment. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and the tall guy was standing there. "We've decided to let you go," he said, his voice flat. "But you don't tell anyone about this, got it? If we see any cops around here, we'll come find you." I nodded, too scared to speak. He grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet, dragging me back through the factory. The other squatters were watching, their eyes cold and hostile. They shoved me out the door and into the night. I stumbled, almost falling. "Get out of here," the tall guy said, slamming the door behind me. I ran. I didn't stop until I was far away from the factory, my heart pounding and my breath coming in gasps. I found a payphone and called the police, telling them what had happened. They promised to send someone to check it out, but I didn't wait around to see what would happen. I went home and locked all the doors, shaking with fear. I couldn't stop thinking about those squatters, their cold eyes and harsh voices. I knew I had to be careful. If they found out I had called the police, they might come after me. I didn't go back to the factory. I quit the job the next day, finding something else that was safer. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me, the memory of those squatters and their threats. It haunted me, a constant reminder of how close I had come to something terrible. Even now, I can't drive past that old factory without feeling a chill. I know the squatters are probably long gone, but the fear remains. Before we continue, I've teamed up with an incredible company called DreamPad that offers fantastic sleep products you might be interested in. One of their standout products is the DreamPad pillow, and let me tell you, it's a game changer for anyone looking to enhance their sleep quality. This pillow isn't your average pillow. It's equipped with innovative technology that delivers soothing sounds directly to your inner ear through gentle vibrations. Picture drifting off to sleep while listening to calming music, nature sounds, or even guided meditations, all without disturbing anyone else around you. Plus, it's available in medium, firm, and even memory foam options, so you don't need headphones or earbuds. Just great sound. And here's the kicker, you can even enjoy all the Horror Hut YouTube videos with the DreamPad pillow as you ease into dreamland. Setting it up is a breeze. Simply connect the pillow to the DreamPad app on your phone, choose your preferred audio, adjust the volume to your liking, and let the relaxation begin. And guess what? I've managed to secure a 15% discount on any of their products exclusively for all my listeners. Just use the code HorrorHut15 at checkout or click the link in the video description below to claim your discount. Give it a shot and let me know how it works for you in the comments. Now, let's get back to the video. I was working the night shift at a small hospital in rural West Virginia. It was a quiet place, usually. The kind of place where not much happens, and we mostly dealt with minor injuries and elderly patients. But one night, everything changed. It was around midnight when they brought him in. He was tall, with a rough look about him. Dirty clothes, scruffy beard. He had a deep cut on his arm that was bleeding badly. The paramedics said they found him by the side of the road, claiming he was attacked by someone. He looked nervous, eyes darting around the room. I was the only nurse on duty. The doctor was in another part of the hospital, dealing with an emergency. So, it was up to me to take care of this guy. I led him to a room and started cleaning his wound. He was fidgety, wincing at every touch. "What happened?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Got in a fight," he mumbled. "Some guy tried to rob me." Something about his story didn't sit right with me, but I didn't push it. I just focused on stitching him up, trying to stay professional. As I worked, I noticed he kept glancing at the door, like he was expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Once I finished, I told him to stay put while I went to get some painkillers. As I walked down the hallway, I heard a commotion outside. Sirens. Lots of them. I peeked out the window and saw several police cars pulling into the parking lot. My heart started to race. I went back to the room where the man was. "The police are here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is there something you need to tell me?" His eyes went wide, and he jumped off the bed. "You can't let them find me," he said, grabbing my arm. "You don't understand. If they find me, I'm dead." I pulled away, scared. "Who are you?" I demanded. Before he could answer, there was a knock on the door. "Police," a voice called out. "We need to talk to you." The man's face twisted in fear. He backed into the corner, looking for a way out. I didn't know what to do. I was just a nurse, caught in the middle of something way over my head. "Hide," I whispered, pointing to the closet. He nodded and slipped inside, closing the door behind him. I took a deep breath and opened the door. 2 officers stood there, looking serious. "We're looking for a fugitive," one of them said. "He's dangerous. Have you seen anyone suspicious?" I shook my head, trying to act normal. "No, just a few patients with minor injuries. What did he do? He's wanted for armed robbery and assault, the officer said. We got a tip he might be hiding out in this area. My heart was pounding. I knew I should tell them, but something held me back. I'll keep an eye out, I said, forcing a smile. They nodded and moved on. I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to calm down. The man came out of the closet, looking relieved. Thank you, he said. You don't know what you've done for me. I didn't respond. I just wanted him to leave. You need to go, I said. Find somewhere else to hide. He nodded and headed for the window, but before he could open it, the door burst open and the officers rushed in. They grabbed him, pulling him to the ground. He struggled, but they overpowered him, cuffing his hands behind his back. You lied to us, one of the officers said to me, anger in his eyes. I'm sorry, I stammered. I didn't know what to do. They hauled the man away, leaving me alone in the room. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I was going to be sick. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I spent the rest of the night in a daze, replaying everything over and over in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done something terribly wrong. I had let a dangerous man stay hidden, even if it was just for a few minutes. In the morning, the doctor came back and asked me what had happened. I told him everything, and he just nodded, saying I did the best I could in a tough situation. But I didn't feel better. I kept thinking about that man's desperate eyes, his plea for help. Maybe he was dangerous, but he was also scared. And I had been caught in the middle, just trying to do my job. The whole experience left me shaken, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong, even in a quiet, rural hospital. I didn't tell anyone else about it. I just wanted to forget. But every time I walk down the hallway, I remember his face and the fear in his voice. And I wonder if I did the right thing, or if I should have done something differently. I was working the night shift as a janitor in a high-rise office building in downtown Chicago. The building was quiet, as usual, and I was just doing my rounds, emptying trash bins and vacuuming the carpets. It was a pretty standard night until I got to the 15th floor. I stepped out of the elevator with my cleaning cart, the lights dimmed for the night. The silence was comforting, like every other night. I headed to the first office and started my routine. As I was finishing up, I heard a faint noise, like someone talking. I ignored it at first, thinking it might be coming from another floor. But then I heard it again, louder this time. I paused, trying to listen more closely. It was definitely coming from down the hall. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check it out. I walked quietly down the hallway, the voices getting clearer. They were coming from one of the larger conference rooms. As I got closer, I realized the door was slightly ajar. I peeked through the crack and saw 3 men inside, all dressed in black and wearing masks. They were armed with guns and were rifling through the drawers and cabinets. My heart started pounding. I knew I shouldn't be there, but I was frozen in place, unable to move. One of the men looked up, and I quickly ducked back, hoping he hadn't seen me. I backed away slowly, trying to get back to the elevator, but my foot caught on the edge of a carpet and I stumbled, making a noise. The talking inside the room stopped. I heard footsteps approaching the door. Panicking, I looked for a place to hide. There was a supply closet a few feet away, and I darted inside, closing the door as quietly as I could. I could hear them now, their footsteps echoing in the hallway. They were looking for me. My heart was beating so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. "Did you see anyone?" one of them asked. "Yeah, someone was definitely out here," another replied. "Find them. We can't let them leave." I stayed as still as possible, clutching a mop handle like it was a weapon. The footsteps grew louder, and then they were right outside the closet. The doorknob turned, and I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the worst. The door creaked open, and I felt a cold breeze as it swung inward. I opened my eyes just a sliver and saw a pair of boots. One of the men stood there, scanning the room. He didn't see me tucked behind the door. After what felt like forever, he turned and walked away. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm myself. I knew I needed to get out of there, but I didn't know how. I waited until I couldn't hear their footsteps anymore, then quietly crept out of the closet. I headed for the stairwell, thinking it might be safer than the elevator. As I pushed open the stairwell door, it made a loud creak. I cringed, hoping they hadn't heard it. I started down the stairs, moving as quickly and quietly as I could. I was almost at the next landing when I heard the door above me burst open. "There he is," one of them shouted. I ran faster, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps getting closer. I reached the 12th floor and shoved open the door, darting into the hallway. I needed a place to hide, but the offices were all locked. I kept running, looking for anything that might help. I turned a corner and found myself in another hallway, this one lined with cubicles. I ducked into one, trying to catch my breath. I could hear them in the stairwell, searching for me. I needed a plan, and fast. I spotted a phone on one of the desks and grabbed it, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The operator answered, and I whispered as quietly as I could, explaining what was happening. They told me to stay on the line and that help was on the way. I heard footsteps again, closer this time. I hung up and crouched lower, praying they wouldn't find me. One of the men walked past the cubicles, looking around. He was so close I could see the sweat on his forehead. He stopped, looking right at the cubicle I was hiding in. I held my breath, my heart pounding. He took a step closer, and I knew I was done for. But then, a noise from the other end of the hallway caught his attention. He turned and walked away, heading towards the sound. I took the opportunity to move, crawling on my hands and knees to another cubicle further down. I needed to keep moving, to stay ahead of them. I could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. I just needed to hold out a little longer. I made it to the end of the hallway and found a small storage room. I slipped inside and closed the door, hoping it would buy me some time. The sirens were louder now, and I could see flashing lights outside the window. I heard the men shouting, panicking as they realized the police were arriving. I stayed hidden, listening as they ran down the hallway, trying to escape. The sound of their footsteps faded, and then it was quiet. I waited, afraid to move. Finally, I heard voices, but these were different. The police were here. I slowly opened the door and stepped out, hands raised. An officer saw me and rushed over, guiding me to safety. They searched the building and found the men trying to escape through a back exit. They were arrested, and I was taken outside, where I finally felt like I could breathe again. I sat on the curb, shaking, as the officers asked me questions. I told them everything, from the moment I saw the men to the chase through the stairwell. They reassured me that I was safe now, but I couldn't shake the fear. It was a night I'd never forget. What started as a normal shift turned into a nightmare. I was just a janitor, trying to do my job, and ended up in the middle of a robbery. I was working the evening shift at the small convenience store in our town in Arkansas. It was a quiet night, just like any other. The store is located on the outskirts, away from the main roads, so we usually don't get many customers late at night. I was restocking shelves and keeping an eye on the clock, waiting for my shift to end. Around 10 p.m., a group of 3 people walked in. They were wearing hoodies, which wasn't unusual for the cooler weather, but something about them felt off. They split up and started wandering around the store, not really looking at anything in particular. I got a strange feeling in my gut, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe they were just trying to stay warm or killing time. I went back behind the counter, keeping one eye on them. One of the guys came up and asked for cigarettes. As I turned to grab them, I heard the door chime again. Another person walked in, this one wearing a mask. I froze for a moment, but then forced myself to continue as if nothing was wrong. When I turned back to hand over the cigarettes, the guy reached into his hoodie and pulled out a gun. "Empty the register," he said, his voice calm but firm. My heart started racing. I glanced at the masked person who had just entered. They were now standing by the door, making sure no one else came in. I tried to stay calm and opened the register. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the money. The guy with the gun leaned over the counter, grabbing the cash and stuffing it into a bag. "Hurry up," he snapped. The other 2 were still wandering around, but now I could see they were shoving items into their pockets. The person by the door kept looking outside, probably to make sure no one was coming. Just as the guy with the gun finished grabbing the cash, another customer walked in. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, just stopping by for his usual late-night snack. He took one look at the scene and froze. The guy by the door moved quickly, shoving the older man to the ground. "Stay down," he yelled. The tension in the air was thick. I could barely breathe. The guy with the gun turned his attention to the older man, and for a split second, I thought about making a run for it. But I knew that could end badly for both of us. The masked person moved towards me, and I saw them pull out a knife. They pointed it at me and said, "Don't try anything stupid." My mind was racing. I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. I glanced at the security camera above the counter, hoping it was capturing everything. Then, I heard the sirens. Someone must have seen something and called the police. The robbers panicked. The guy with the gun grabbed the older man and pulled him up, using him as a shield. "We're leaving," he said. "Don't try to follow us." They backed towards the door, dragging the older man with them. I stayed behind the counter, trying to stay out of their way. As soon as they were outside, I ran to lock the door behind them. My hands were still shaking, and I fumbled with the keys, but I managed to get it locked. I watched through the glass as they ran to a car parked nearby and sped off, leaving the older man on the ground. The police arrived moments later, and I unlocked the door to let them in. I was shaking so badly I could barely speak. One of the officers helped the older man while another took my statement. It was over, but the fear lingered. The police took the security footage and assured me they'd do everything they could to catch the robbers. I nodded, but it didn't make me feel any safer. I finished my shift in a daze, trying to process what had happened. The store was a mess, and I had to clean up, but all I could think about was how close I had come to getting hurt, or worse. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the gun, the masked faces, the fear in the older man's eyes. The next day, I went back to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every time the door chimed, my heart skipped a beat. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting the robbers to come back. It took a few days for things to return to normal, but I was never quite the same. I was more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. The police never caught the robbers, and that made it harder to feel safe. But I had to move on, keep working, keep living. I had been driving through Texas for hours, delivering goods on a long night shift. The road was empty, just the occasional flicker of headlights from passing cars. I was getting tired, but I knew I had to push through. The cargo needed to be delivered by morning, and there was no time for a break. Around midnight, I saw a set of headlights in my rearview mirror. They seemed to be getting closer fast. I didn't think much of it until the car pulled up right behind me, its high beams blinding in my mirrors. I tried to shake them off by speeding up a bit, but the car stayed right on my tail. Out of nowhere, the car swerved around me and cut me off, forcing me to slam on the brakes. My truck skidded to a halt, and before I could react, 3 men jumped out of the car, all of them armed. One of them banged on my window with the butt of his gun, yelling at me to open the door. My heart was pounding as I slowly rolled down the window. "Get out," the man barked, waving his gun in my face. I didn't have a choice. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out of the truck, trying to keep my hands visible so they wouldn't think I was reaching for something. The men grabbed me and shoved me to the ground. One of them pressed the barrel of his gun against my head while the others searched the truck. "What's in the cargo?" the guy with the gun asked. I told him it was just regular goods, nothing valuable, just stuff for stores. They didn't seem to care. They pulled me to my feet and shoved me towards their car. "You're coming with us," one of them said. They forced me into the back seat and took my keys. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what they wanted. Were they going to steal the truck? Use it for something else? The car sped off, and I realized they were taking me further into the middle of nowhere. The road became a narrow dirt path, surrounded by trees. I could barely see anything outside the window. After what felt like an eternity, they stopped at an old, abandoned warehouse. They dragged me out of the car and into the warehouse. It was dark and smelled of mildew. They tied me to a chair and started discussing their plan. I caught bits and pieces of their conversation, something about using my truck for smuggling drugs across the border. My stomach dropped. This was bad. Really bad. One of them noticed I was listening and walked over, his face inches from mine. "You try anything, and you're dead," he said. I nodded, too scared to speak. They left me there, tied up, while they went outside to unload the truck. I struggled against the ropes, but they were too tight. I needed to find a way out. I remembered my phone was in my pocket, but there was no way I could reach it without them noticing. I had to wait for the right moment. After a while, they came back inside, arguing about something. They seemed distracted, and that was my chance. I managed to tip the chair over and reach into my pocket. My fingers found my phone, and I dialed 911, hoping the operator could hear me whispering for help. One of the men noticed me and rushed over, kicking the phone out of my hand. He yelled at the others, and they started panicking. "We need to get out of here," one of them said. They were arguing now, not paying attention to me. Suddenly, I heard sirens in the distance. The men heard them too, and they bolted. They ran out of the warehouse, leaving me tied to the chair. I was alone, but the sirens were getting closer. I knew help was on the way. Minutes later, the police burst into the warehouse. They untied me and asked what happened. I told them everything, how I was hijacked, tied up, and left here. They called for an ambulance to check me out. I was just grateful to be alive. The police searched the area but didn't find the men. They assured me they'd keep looking, but I knew those guys were long gone. I was just thankful I made it out safe. I got back to my truck, and the police escorted me to the nearest station to make a full report. The whole experience left me shaken. I couldn't believe how quickly things had gone wrong. But I was alive, and that was all that mattered. The next day, I finished my delivery, but I couldn't shake the fear that those men might come back. I decided to take some time off, let things settle. It was the most terrifying night of my life, and I knew I'd never forget it. It was just another quiet night at the dispatch center. The shifts were long, but I was used to them. There wasn't much to do in our small town in Idaho, especially during the night shift. Most calls were about lost pets or occasional minor car accidents. I settled into my chair, coffee in hand, ready for another uneventful night. The clock showed 1 a.m. when the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting the usual. 911, what's your emergency? There was a pause, then a man's voice. He sounded calm but strange. I can see you, he said. I looked around the room. Excuse me? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It wasn't unusual for prank calls, but something about his tone was unsettling. I'm outside your building. I've been watching you for a while now, he continued, his voice chillingly even. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I glanced at the monitors, showing live feed from the security cameras around the building. Everything looked normal. Sir, this is not funny. If you have an emergency, please state it. He laughed softly, the sound sending a wave of fear through me. No emergency. Just enjoying the view. I decided to alert the on-duty officer, Jake, who was out on patrol. I pressed the button for the radio. Jake, you there? His voice crackled back. Yeah, what's up? We've got a strange call. Guy says he's outside watching the building. Can you check the perimeter? On my way, he replied. I turned back to the phone. Sir, the police are on their way. If this is a joke, you're in serious trouble. The man chuckled again. I'm not joking. I see you've called for backup. Smart move. I felt my heart racing. I tried to keep him talking. Why are you doing this? There was another pause. I like seeing the fear. You have a lot of it right now. I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. What do you want? Just to watch. For now, he replied. Jake's voice came through the radio again. Perimeter's clear. No sign of anyone. I looked at the cameras again. Jake, he says he's watching me. Can you check the blind spots? On it, Jake responded. I turned my attention back to the call. The police are checking the area. They will find you. Maybe. Maybe not, he said. It's a big building. I heard Jake's footsteps outside, and he came through the front door a moment later. He gave me a nod and started checking the rooms. Sir, this is your last chance. Identify yourself or face arrest, I said, trying to sound authoritative. The man was silent for a moment. Then he whispered, I'll be closer soon. The line went dead. I felt a wave of relief but also dread. Jake came back into the room. Nothing. Place is empty. I explained the call to Jake in detail. He frowned. Probably some local idiot messing around. Still, I'll stay here for a bit. We sat in silence, the tension heavy in the air. Jake kept an eye on the monitors while I tried to focus on my work. Time passed slowly. It was almost 3 a.m. when the phone rang again. I answered it, heart pounding. 911, what's your emergency? Miss me? It was the same voice. I motioned to Jake, who immediately started looking at the cameras. Where are you? I demanded. Closer, he said, almost whispering. Jake grabbed his flashlight and headed back outside. I stayed on the line, trying to keep the man talking. Why are you doing this? To feel alive, he replied. Don't you feel it? A rush of fear? I heard a noise behind me and turned, but it was just Jake coming back in. Still nothing, he said quietly. Sir, the police are inside now. You will be caught, I said, hoping to scare him off. He laughed again, softer this time. You think you're safe. But I can see you. The line went dead again. I looked at Jake, panic in my eyes. He's playing with us. Jake nodded. Stay here. Lock the door. I'm going to check the roof. I watched him leave, then locked the door behind him. I felt trapped, my eyes constantly scanning the monitors. Minutes felt like hours. The phone rang again. 911, what's your emergency? I said, my voice shaking. Look outside, the voice said. I hesitated, then slowly moved to the window. There, in the darkness, I could barely make out a figure standing by the fence. He was holding something, a phone, I realized. I quickly called Jake on the radio. He's by the fence. South side. On my way, Jake responded. I watched the figure as Jake approached from the side. But then, the figure disappeared into the shadows. Jake ran to where he had been but found nothing. I slumped in my chair, the fear overwhelming. The phone rang once more. 911, what's your emergency? I'll be back, the voice said, and then the line went dead for the final time. Jake returned, shaking his head. He's gone. But we'll find him. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and anxiety. When my shift ended, I couldn't leave fast enough. The experience haunted me for days, the voice echoing in my mind. But I was safe. And I was determined never to let my guard down again. Working the night shift at the distribution center in New Jersey was usually uneventful. The warehouse was massive, with aisles stretching out in every direction, filled with boxes and crates. The silence of the night was only broken by the hum of forklifts and the occasional chatter on the walkie-talkies. I liked the quiet, the monotony. It was easy money, and I didn't mind the hours. That night started like any other. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed my checklist, and started my rounds. It was just me and a handful of other workers spread out across the facility. Most of them kept to themselves, and I didn't know them well. Just nodded in passing and kept to my tasks. Around midnight, I was doing inventory in one of the far aisles when I heard hushed voices coming from the loading dock. It struck me as odd because the dock was supposed to be closed and locked up at this hour. Curiosity got the better of me, so I crept closer, staying in the shadows. I peeked around a stack of crates and saw a small group of my coworkers huddled together. There was Tony, the shift supervisor, and a couple of guys I recognized but didn't know by name. They were unloading boxes from a truck that wasn't on any of the manifests. The way they moved, fast and furtive, set off alarm bells in my head. I strained to hear what they were saying. Make sure everything's accounted for, Tony said. We can't afford any mistakes tonight. One of the other guys nodded. Yeah, the boss won't be happy if anything goes missing. You know how he is. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart started pounding. It was clear they were up to something illegal, and I was in way over my head. I thought about just walking away, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But as I took a step back, my foot hit a loose piece of wood, and it made a loud crack. The conversation stopped abruptly. Tony's head snapped up, and his eyes scanned the area. I ducked behind the crates, holding my breath. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice hard and suspicious. I didn't move a muscle. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. After a moment, Tony seemed to dismiss it. "Probably just a rat," he muttered. "Let's get this done." I waited until they were back to work before I slowly backed away and made my way to the break room. My mind was racing. What should I do? Report them? But to whom? Tony was the shift supervisor, the one person I'd normally go to with any issues. And what if they found out it was me who snitched? They could make my life hell, or worse. I decided to play it cool for the rest of the shift. I went about my tasks, avoiding the loading dock and keeping to myself. But the images of them unloading those boxes kept flashing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. When the shift ended at 6 a.m., I clocked out and headed to my car. The cold morning air felt good against my skin, but it didn't clear my head. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar sights along the way. All I could think about was what I'd seen and what I should do next. That evening, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, my thoughts a jumbled mess. Around midnight, I got up and decided to do some research. I looked up drug trafficking operations and the penalties for getting involved. It was serious stuff. People went to prison for years for what Tony and the others were doing. The next night at work, I kept my head down and did my job, trying to act normal. But every time I saw Tony or the other guys, I felt a surge of anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew I'd seen something, that they were watching me. A week passed, and I was a wreck. I barely slept, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder. One night, as I was finishing my shift, Tony cornered me in the break room. "Hey, got a minute?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes hard. "Sure," I replied, my heart racing. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it. "You've been acting strange lately. Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could feel the sweat on my forehead. "You know, it's important to stay focused on the job. Distractions can be dangerous." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Good," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Keep it that way." After he left, I sat down, my legs feeling weak. It was a warning, plain and simple. I knew then that I had to do something. I couldn't keep living like this, in fear every day. But I had to be smart about it. The next night, I waited until Tony and the others were busy with their illicit activities. I snuck into the office and used the phone to call the anonymous tip line for the police. I kept my voice low, giving them all the details I could without revealing my identity. I hung up, my heart pounding. I hoped I'd done the right thing. All I could do now was wait. The following night, the warehouse was raided. Police swarmed the place, arresting Tony and his crew. I stayed out of sight, my heart in my throat, as they were led away in handcuffs. It was over. In the days that followed, I was questioned by the police. I played dumb, pretending I had no idea what was going on. They seemed to buy it, and eventually, things started to return to normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling of paranoia. Even though Tony and the others were gone, I kept looking over my shoulder, afraid that someone would come after me for what I'd done. It's been a few months now, and I finally started to feel like I can breathe again. But I'll never forget those nights in the warehouse, the fear, and the sense of danger that hung over me. I learned a lot about myself through this ordeal. About courage and fear, and the lengths I'd go to protect myself. I hope I never have to go through something like that again. But if I do, at least I know I can handle it. I took the night shift at a remote lodge in Alaska to get away from the chaos of the city. The place was beautiful, surrounded by nothing but snow and trees, and the isolation felt like a blessing. The lodge was old, with creaky floors and dim lighting, but it had a cozy charm. My job was simple: check in guests, manage the front desk, and handle any issues that came up during the night. It was usually quiet. Most guests were there for the solitude and the scenery, and they kept to themselves. I liked the peace. It gave me time to read or just sit by the fire and listen to the wind howling outside. But one night, everything changed. A man checked in late, just before my shift started. He was tall, with a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in weeks. He wore a thick parka and had a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. There was something off about him, but I couldn't put my finger on it. He didn't make much conversation, just signed the register and took his key. I watched him as he went up the stairs to his room, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Something about his eyes, cold and hard, stayed with me. I tried to shake it off and went back to my book, but I couldn't concentrate. Around midnight, the lodge was quiet, and I was alone at the front desk. The wind had picked up outside, making the old building creak. I decided to do a quick round, checking the doors and windows to make sure everything was secure. As I passed by the guest rooms, I heard voices. I stopped and listened. It was coming from the room of the man who had checked in earlier. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of light. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity got the better of me. I peeked through the crack and saw the man talking on a satellite phone. His voice was low and urgent, and I couldn't make out the words, but his tone was enough to make my skin crawl. He sounded desperate, almost frantic. Then I heard him say, "They'll never find me here. It's too remote." That's when it hit me. He was hiding. From what or whom, I didn't know, but it was clear he didn't want to be found. I backed away quietly and returned to the front desk, my mind racing. What should I do? Call the police. But the nearest town was miles away, and there was no cell service out here. The lodge had a landline, but what if he heard me? What if he decided to make sure I couldn't tell anyone? I decided to wait and see if anything else happened. Maybe I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I spent the next couple of hours on edge, jumping at every little sound. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. My heart pounded as I looked up and saw the man approaching the front desk. He looked around, his eyes darting nervously, and then he spotted me. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded, but his eyes were cold. "Just needed some water," he said, holding up an empty bottle. I pointed to the kitchen. "There's a tap in there. Help yourself." He stared at me for a moment longer than necessary, then walked past me into the kitchen. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and glanced around for something I could use as a weapon if I needed to. A few minutes later, he returned, his bottle full. "Thanks," he said, and went back up to his room. I watched him go, every nerve in my body on high alert. I didn't know what to do. I was alone in a remote lodge with a man who was clearly dangerous. I decided to stay behind the desk where I could see both the stairs and the front door. If he tried anything, at least I'd have a chance to react. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. I kept glancing at the clock, willing the morning to come. Finally, around 6 a.m., the sky started to lighten, and I began to relax a little. At 7 a.m., the morning shift arrived. I quickly pulled my coworker, Sarah, aside and told her what had happened. She agreed that we needed to call the police, but we had to be careful. We went to the office, locked the door, and dialed the local authorities on the landline. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. They said they'd send someone as soon as possible, but it might take a while due to the weather and the distance. In the meantime, we were to stay calm and not confront the man. We returned to the front desk, trying to act normal. The man came down around 8 a.m., looking more relaxed. He even smiled at us as he left for breakfast, which made my skin crawl. Hours passed, and I kept glancing out the window, looking for any sign of the police. Finally, around noon, I saw a snowmobile approaching. 2 officers dismounted and made their way to the lodge. We met them at the door and quickly explained where the man was. They nodded and headed upstairs, one of them signaling for us to stay back. Moments later, we heard a scuffle, then the sound of someone being handcuffed. They brought him down in cuffs, and he glared at me with pure hatred. "You'll regret this," he hissed as they let him out. I felt a surge of relief as the police took him away. Sarah and I looked at each other, both of us shaken but grateful it was over. The police told us later that the man was a wanted criminal, on the run for a series of violent crimes. We'd been lucky. Very lucky. I quit my job at the lodge shortly after that. The peace and quiet I'd once loved now felt tainted. I moved back to the city, where there were people and noise and safety in numbers. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the wind howling outside and remember the cold, hard look in that man's eyes. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't heard his conversation, if I hadn't called the police. I try not to think about it, but it's a part of me now, a reminder of how close I came to real danger. I took a job at a gas station in a deserted area of Nevada. It wasn't much, but it was work. The station was old, and the nearest town was miles away. I liked the quiet at first, the isolation. But that changed fast. It was a late shift, around midnight, when I first noticed him. A man, maybe in his 40s, with a scruffy beard and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. He came in for gas and stood by the counter for a long time, just staring at me. His eyes were dark, empty. "Need anything else?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. He shook his head and left without a word. I watched him drive off, a beat-up old truck disappearing into the night. Something about him unsettled me, but I shrugged it off. An hour later, I went outside to take a break. That's when I saw the spray paint on the side of the building. Big, red letters spelling out something I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. My heart sank. Vandalism was the last thing I needed. I went back inside, grabbed a flashlight, and took a closer look. It was a mess of symbols and words, none of it making any sense. I felt a chill. Who would do this? And why? I decided to call my boss in the morning and report it. For now, I just wanted to get through the night. Around 2 a.m., I heard a noise from the back of the station. It sounded like metal scraping against metal. I grabbed the flashlight and went to check it out. My hands were shaking. As I turned the corner, the beam of light caught a glimpse of movement. Someone was there. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. I took a few steps closer, and that's when I saw him. The same man from earlier, crouched by the storage shed, a crowbar in his hand. "What are you doing?" I shouted, fear creeping into my voice. He stood up slowly, a menacing grin spreading across his face. "Just fixing things," he said, his voice cold and mocking. "Get out of here, or I'm calling the cops," I threatened, but he didn't move. Instead, he took a step towards me. "I don't think you'll do that," he said, and I realized he was right. The nearest police station was too far, and there was no way they'd get here in time. I backed away slowly, keeping the flashlight trained on him. He laughed, a low, chilling sound, and turned back to the shed. I ran inside, locked the door, and grabbed the phone. My hands were trembling so much I could barely dial. When I finally got through to the police, they told me to stay put and they'd send someone as soon as they could. Hours passed, each minute stretching into an eternity. I kept watching the security monitors, but he was gone. I hoped he'd given up and left. But the damage was done. I knew he wasn't just some random vandal. He was targeting me. Around 4 a.m., the phone rang. I jumped, my heart pounding. It was my boss. I explained what happened, and he promised to come by in the morning. I hung up, feeling a little better, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The sun started to rise, casting long shadows across the desert. I was exhausted, but I knew I had to stay alert. Just as I was starting to relax, I heard a loud crash from the front of the station. I ran to the door and looked outside. The man's truck was back, and he was smashing the windows with a tire iron. "Stop it!" I shouted, but he ignored me. I ran back inside and grabbed the only weapon I had, a baseball bat I kept behind the counter for protection. My hands were sweating, and my breath was coming in short gasps. When I got back outside, he was standing by the pump, the tire iron hanging loosely from his hand. "You should have left when you had the chance," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I don't want any trouble," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Just leave, and we can forget this ever happened." He shook his head slowly. "It's too late for that," he said, and lunged at me. I swung the bat, but he was faster. He knocked it out of my hands and shoved me to the ground. Pain shot through my arm as I landed hard on the concrete. He stood over me, the tire iron raised, and I knew I was out of options. "Please," I begged, "just go." He paused, and for a moment I thought he might actually listen. But then he smiled, a cruel, twisted smile, and raised the tire iron higher. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. Just then, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. His smile faltered, and he looked around, panicked. The sirens grew louder, and he took a step back. "You got lucky," he spat, and ran to his truck. I lay there, watching as he sped off, the sound of the sirens chasing him into the desert. The police arrived moments later, finding me bruised and shaken but alive. They took my statement, and I watched as they drove off in pursuit of the man. I knew they'd probably never find him. He was just a shadow in the night, a reminder of how vulnerable we really are. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't stay there, not after what happened. The station was just a building, but it held too many memories of fear and pain. I packed up my things and left Nevada, hoping to leave the terror behind. But even now, in the safety of my new home, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting. I don't think I'll ever truly feel safe again. I worked late shifts at a small office in Montana, handling data entry for a local business. It was a quiet job, perfect for someone like me who enjoyed the solitude. The office was in a secluded part of town, surrounded by empty lots and an old warehouse. It never bothered me, though. I liked the peace and quiet. One night, around 10 p.m., the phone rang. It startled me because the office phone rarely rang, especially not at night. I picked it up, thinking it might be my boss checking in. "Hello?" I said. There was silence for a moment, then a raspy voice said, "I see you're working late again, Sarah." My heart skipped a beat. How did they know my name? I tried to stay calm. "Who is this?" The line went dead. I shook it off, thinking it might be a prank. But it left me feeling uneasy. I decided to finish my work quickly and head home. The next night, the phone rang again at the same time. I hesitated but picked it up. "Hello?" The same voice. "Nice blue sweater, Sarah. It looks good on you." I looked down at my sweater, my heart racing. How could they see me? I ran to the window and peered outside but saw nothing but darkness. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, but it felt too real. I called my friend Jenny and told her about the calls. She offered to stay on the phone with me while I finished my work. It helped a little, having her voice in my ear, but I was still jumpy. The calls kept coming, night after night. Each time, the voice knew more about me. My schedule, my clothes, even what I had for lunch. I reported it to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more information. They advised me to keep a log of the calls and to be cautious. One night, I decided to try to catch the caller. I left the phone off the hook, hoping it would frustrate them. It did. Around 10:15, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. "You think you're clever, don't you?" the voice hissed. "You can't hide from me." I hung up and called the police again, but they still couldn't help much. They suggested I change my number and consider getting a security system for the office. My boss wasn't too keen on the extra expense, but he agreed after hearing my story. I installed cameras around the office and made sure all the doors and windows were locked. For a few days, things were quiet. I started to relax, thinking maybe the caller had given up. Then, one night, I was reviewing some documents when the office phone rang. My heart sank. I checked the security feed but didn't see anything unusual. I picked up the phone, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Who is this? What do you want?" The voice laughed, a chilling sound that made my skin crawl. "I'm closer than you think, Sarah. Much closer." I hung up and checked the security feed again. Nothing. I decided to leave early. As I was packing up, I heard a noise from the back room, a faint creaking sound. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my things and ran out of the office, locking the door behind me. The next day, I showed the security footage to the police. They found nothing unusual, no sign of anyone near the office. They suggested it might be someone I knew, but I couldn't think of anyone who would do this to me. I started staying with Jenny, not wanting to be alone. She lived a few miles away, and the commute was longer, but I felt safer. We set up a system where she would call me at 10 p.m. every night to check on me. One night, while at Jenny's, I got a call from an unknown number. My heart pounded as I answered. "Hello?" The voice was calm, almost friendly. "Miss me, Sarah?" I dropped the phone and backed away, my legs shaking. Jenny grabbed the phone and shouted into it, but the caller had already hung up. We called the police again, but there was little they could do. They suggested I take some time off work. My boss agreed, understanding my fear. I stayed with Jenny, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. A week later, I went back to work, feeling a little better with the security measures in place. But the call started again, this time on my cell phone. The voice was more menacing, more demanding. It felt like a never-ending nightmare. One night, as I was leaving the office, I noticed a car parked down the street. It hadn't been there before. I got into my car and drove home, constantly checking my rearview mirror. The car followed me. My heart raced as I pulled into Jenny's driveway. I ran inside, locking the door behind me. The car parked outside, and I watched as a figure got out and approached the house. I called the police, my hand shaking so badly I could barely dial. Jenny grabbed a baseball bat, ready to defend us. The police arrived just as the figure reached the front door. It was a man in his 40s, disheveled and angry. They arrested him and found out he had been stalking me for weeks. He had installed hidden cameras in the office and had been watching my every move. The police assured me he would be charged and that I would be safe now. I changed my numbers, moved to a new apartment, and tried to move on with my life. But the fear never really went away. I always double-check my locks, and I never stay late at work anymore. It's a terrifying experience that I wouldn't wish on anyone. The feeling of being watched, of not knowing who to trust, stays with you. I'm grateful to be safe now, but I'll never forget those nights in the office, wondering if I would make it out alive. Working as a security guard in a luxury apartment complex in Miami was supposed to be an easy gig. I had been at it for about 6 months, and most of my shifts were uneventful. The place was upscale, and the residents mostly kept to themselves. I spent my nights making rounds, watching the cameras, and occasionally dealing with noise complaints or parking issues. One night, while I was doing my routine check, I noticed something odd on the security feed. One of the residents, a guy named Mr. Vargas, was bringing a lot of people into his apartment. At first, I thought maybe he was having a party, but it was a Tuesday night, and he kept doing it every other night. The people he brought in always seemed nervous, looking around like they were scared. I didn't think much of it until a week later when I was making my rounds on the 10th floor, where Mr. Vargas lived. As I walked past his door, I heard muffled cries. It sounded like someone was pleading. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door, but I didn't knock. I decided to check the cameras again instead. Back at the security office, I rewound the footage and watched closely. The people he brought in were always different, and they never left. My stomach tightened as I thought about what could be happening in that apartment. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something felt very wrong. I debated with myself for days. Should I report this? What if I was wrong? What if it was nothing, and I lost my job over a misunderstanding? But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. The next time I was on shift, I saw Mr. Vargas bring in a young woman. She looked terrified. That was the tipping point. I decided I had to do something. I called my supervisor and told him what I had seen. He dismissed it, saying it was probably just a misunderstanding. I felt frustrated and helpless. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do more. I decided to confront Mr. Vargas. I waited until he left his apartment and then knocked on the door. No one answered, but the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The place was dark and smelled musty. I followed the sound of muffled voices to a back room. What I saw made my blood run cold. The room was filled with makeshift beds, and there were people, men, women, even a couple of teenagers, all looking scared and malnourished. They were chained to the walls. I backed out of the room and left the apartment as quickly as I could. I called the police from the security office, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I told them everything and waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When the police arrived, they raided the apartment and freed the people inside. Mr. Vargas was arrested, and the story made the local news. He was part of a human trafficking ring, using his apartment as a holding place before moving his victims elsewhere. The complex's management wasn't happy that I had gone into the apartment without permission, but they couldn't fire me after what had happened. The residents were shaken, and the complex installed more security measures to prevent something like this from happening again. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of those people. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't done anything. The fear and the guilt were overwhelming. Eventually, things settled down. I still work at the complex, but I'm more vigilant now. I check every camera feed twice, and I don't hesitate to report anything suspicious. It's a lesson I learned the hard way. Sometimes doing the right thing is terrifying, but the consequences of doing nothing are even worse. Looking back, I'm glad I followed my instincts, even though it was one of the scariest things I've ever done. The people we saved are getting the help they need, and Mr. Vargas is behind bars where he belongs. I took a job at a plant in Ohio, working the night shift. It was isolated, surrounded by fields and far from any town. The plant itself was old, a maze of machinery and dimly lit corridors. Most nights were quiet, just the hum of the machines and the occasional sound of my own footsteps echoing through the halls. One night, though, things changed. It started with whispers among my coworkers during breaks. They seemed tense, glancing around nervously when they thought no one was looking. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my tasks and keeping to myself. But the unease in the air was palpable. Around midnight, I was making my rounds when I heard raised voices coming from one of the control rooms. I hesitated, unsure if I should intervene or pretend I didn't hear anything. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached quietly. Peering through the small window in the door, I saw several of my coworkers gathered around a computer screen. They were huddled close, talking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their expressions were serious, almost frantic. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. What were they up to? Were they planning something? I debated whether to confront them or report it to our supervisor. Before I could decide, one of them noticed me standing there. "Hey, what are you doing?" he asked sharply, stepping towards me. I tried to stammer out an excuse, but he cut me off. "Mind your own business," he growled, and the others nodded in agreement. I backed away, my mind racing. Something was definitely going on, something they didn't want me to know about. I spent the rest of the shift on edge, watching my coworkers closely. They avoided me, speaking in hushed tones whenever I walked by. I felt like a stranger in my own workplace, surrounded by people I couldn't trust. As the hours ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a pair of eyes, every creak of the floorboards made my heart skip a beat. I was alone, vulnerable, and unsure who I could turn to for help. Around 3 a.m., I decided to investigate further. I waited until the control room was empty and slipped inside. The computer screen was still on, displaying a complex diagram of the plant systems. It looked normal at first glance, but something about it made my skin crawl. I scrolled through the files, searching for anything out of the ordinary. That's when I found it, a document labeled Plan. My hand shook as I opened it, revealing detailed instructions on how to sabotage the plant's machinery. My stomach churned. They were planning to cause a major malfunction, endangering everyone inside. Panic set in as I realized I had stumbled onto something dangerous, something that could have catastrophic consequences. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me. I whirled around to see my coworkers standing there, blocking my only exit. Their faces were twisted with anger, betrayal. "You weren't supposed to see that," one of them hissed, advancing towards me. I backed away, my mind racing for a way out. They outnumbered me, and I knew I couldn't fight them off. "Please," I begged, my voice trembling. "Just let me go." They laughed, a cold, menacing sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Can't do that," another one said, pulling something from his pocket. It glinted in the dim light, a wrench, heavy and menacing. I looked around desperately, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. But the room was bare, the walls closing in around me. I was trapped, helpless. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We can talk about this. There's no need for violence." But they ignored me, closing in with grim determination. I backed into a corner, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Just as they were about to strike, the door burst open behind them. Light flooded the room, silhouetting a figure in the doorway, our supervisor, accompanied by security guards. They had come to investigate after hearing rumors of a disturbance. The intruders froze, caught off guard. In the chaos that followed, the guards subdued them, one by one. I sank to the floor, shaking with relief and disbelief. I was safe, but the horror of what had almost happened lingered. The police arrived soon after, taking statements and gathering evidence. My coworkers were arrested, their plan thwarted before it could be carried out. I watched as they were led away in handcuffs, their faces filled with rage and defeat. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't go back, couldn't face the memories of that night. The plant was shut down temporarily for investigation, and I heard rumors that it might close for good. It didn't matter to me. All I wanted was to put it behind me, to forget the terror and move on with my life. But the nightmares persisted, haunting me in the quiet moments before sleep. I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted, of staring into the face of evil and barely escaping with my life. It changed me, left me with scars that would never fully heal. Now, I work a different job, in a different city. I try to focus on the present, on rebuilding what was lost. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and my thoughts drift back to that dark room, I wonder if they'll ever come back for me, if the horror will ever truly be over. Working at the bar in New Orleans was usually pretty routine. I'd been doing it for a few years and had seen my fair share of wild nights, but nothing like what happened that one night. It started out like any other shift. The place was busy, filled with the usual mix of tourists and locals. Music played in the background, and the chatter of people having a good time filled the air. Around midnight, this guy walked in. He looked rough, like he'd been through a lot. He took a seat at the bar, ordered a drink, and sat there staring into his glass. At first, I thought he was just another tired soul needing a break, but as the night went on, his mood started to change. He began drinking fast, one shot after another. I tried to slow him down, offered him some water, but he brushed me off. His eyes were dark, and there was something unsettling about the way he watched everyone. Then he started talking to the people around him, getting louder and more aggressive. He yelled at a couple of guys sitting nearby, accusing them of things that made no sense. I went over and asked him to calm down. He glared at me, his eyes full of anger, and told me to mind my own business. I decided it was time to cut him off, so I told him he had enough and needed to leave. That's when things got bad. He stood up, knocking his stool over, and started shouting. The whole bar went quiet, everyone turning to see what was happening. I reached for the phone to call security, but before I could, he grabbed a bottle from the bar and smashed it against the counter. Glass flew everywhere, and people started to back away. He held the broken bottle like a weapon, waving it around and shouting. I tried to keep my distance, hoping he'd calm down, but he just got more agitated. The guy moved towards the door, blocking it and trapping everyone inside. He yelled that nobody was leaving until he got what he wanted, but he never said what that was. The tension in the room was thick, everyone frozen, not knowing what to do. Some people tried to reason with him, but he just screamed at them to shut up. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I'd never dealt with anything like this before. I tried to keep everyone calm, telling them to stay back and not provoke him. The guy was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself, the broken bottle still in his hand. He looked desperate, like a cornered animal. Someone in the back tried to make a break for the emergency exit, but he saw them and lunged, cutting them off. He yelled that if anyone else tried to leave, he'd hurt them. I could see the fear in everyone's eyes. People were huddled together, whispering, trying to come up with a plan. I knew we needed to do something before things got worse. I tried to distract him, talking to him, asking him what he wanted, trying to get him to focus on me. He just kept shouting about how everyone was against him, how he couldn't trust anyone. His paranoia was getting worse by the minute. The bartender, my buddy Jake, signaled to me that he was going to try and call for help. He slowly moved towards the back office, trying to stay out of the guy's line of sight. I kept talking, trying to keep his attention on me. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. Jake managed to slip into the office and call the police. I could hear him talking quietly, trying not to be overheard. The guy with the bottle was getting more agitated, pacing faster, his eyes darting around the room. I knew we didn't have much time. Minutes felt like hours as we waited for the police to arrive. I kept talking, trying to keep him calm, but it wasn't working. He started yelling again, demanding that everyone hand over their wallets and phones. People hesitated, but I nodded at them to do it, hoping to keep him calm. Just as things were reaching a breaking point, the police arrived. They moved in quickly, surrounding the bar. The guy saw them and panicked, grabbing a woman who was sitting nearby and holding the bottle to her throat. The room erupted in screams, everyone backing away even further. The police were shouting at him to let her go, but he just held on tighter, his eyes wild with fear. I felt sick, knowing that anything could happen. One wrong move and someone could get seriously hurt. The standoff seemed to last forever, but finally, one of the officers managed to talk him down. They promised him he wouldn't get hurt if he let the woman go. Slowly, he lowered the bottle and released her. The police moved in and took him down, pinning him to the floor and cuffing him. Everyone in the bar was shaken, but safe. I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me as the police let him out. People started to leave, murmuring to each other, still in shock over what had happened. I just stood there, trying to process everything. The bar was a mess, glass and spilled drinks everywhere, but we were all alive. It was the most terrifying night of my life, something I'll never forget. I still think about that guy sometimes, wondering what drove him to that point. I hope he gets the help he needs, but I'm just glad it's over. I was working security at a stadium in California, a job I took to make ends meet. It was a typical night shift, quiet and uneventful, until I noticed a group of men lurking around the parking lot. They looked out of place, dressed in dark clothing and eyeing the expensive cars parked outside the VIP entrance. At first, I thought they were just lost or looking for a shortcut. But as I watched from a distance, their behavior became suspicious. They moved with purpose, scanning the rows of vehicles as if they were searching for something specific. I radioed my partner, Jim, to keep an eye on them while I continued my rounds inside the stadium. Something didn't sit right with me, a gut feeling that told me trouble was brewing. An hour later, I received a frantic call from Jim. He whispered urgently over the radio, telling me that the men were armed and had started breaking into the cars. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. I hurried back to the parking lot, keeping to the shadows to avoid being spotted. The men were indeed armed, wielding crowbars and flashlights as they smashed windows and rummaged through glove compartments. I had to think fast. Calling the police was risky. They might not arrive in time. I needed to confront the gang without putting myself in danger. My heart raced as I weighed my options. I spotted a security golf cart nearby and decided to use it as a distraction. I revved the engine and drove it towards the gang, shouting at them to freeze. They turned towards me, startled, but didn't back down. One of them raised his crowbar threateningly. I swerved the cart at the last moment, narrowly missing them and causing them to scatter. It bought me enough time to call 911 discreetly, relaying the situation and our location. The gang regrouped quickly, realizing I was alone and unarmed. They started closing in, shouting threats and obscenities. I backed away slowly, trying to maintain a calm facade despite the fear tightening my chest. One of them lunged at me, swinging his crowbar wildly. I ducked and dodged, narrowly avoiding a blow to the head. Adrenaline surged through me as I realized just how close I was to getting seriously hurt. I managed to keep them at bay for a few more minutes until I heard sirens approaching in the distance. The gang heard it too, and their faces twisted with anger and frustration. They knew their time was up. In a desperate move, they grabbed a nearby car keys and tried to make a run for it. I sprinted after them, yelling for them to stop. They managed to hotwire one of the luxury cars and peeled out of the parking lot, narrowly missing me as they sped away. I collapsed to my knees, shaking with relief and exhaustion. The police arrived moments later, sirens blaring and lights flashing. They took statements from me and Jim, securing the scene and searching for any evidence left behind by the gang. As dawn broke, the stadium parking lot was a mess of shattered glass and damaged vehicles. I stood amidst the chaos, trying to process the night's events. I had faced danger head-on and come out alive, but the adrenaline still coursed through my veins. In the following days, the police made arrests based on the evidence gathered at the scene. The gang members were known criminals with a history of car thefts and other offenses. It sent a chill down my spine to think how close I had come to being a victim. I quit my job at the stadium soon after, unable to shake the memories of that terrifying night. The sight of those men, armed and dangerous, haunted my thoughts. It was a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface, even in seemingly safe places. I moved to a quieter town, hoping to leave the fear and uncertainty behind me. But the experience had changed me, leaving me more cautious and wary of strangers. I no longer took safety for granted, always vigilant of my surroundings. The incident at the stadium taught me a valuable lesson about trust and the importance of staying alert. It was a night I would never forget, etched into my memory as a reminder of the fragility of life and the dangers that could lurk around any corner.